The town of Cold Hollow wasn't used to fear. It had always been a sleepy little place, nestled between towering mountains, with thick, dense woods on all sides. The streets were quiet, save for the sound of children's laughter, and the smell of fresh bread from Mrs. Wheeler's bakery that always hung in the air. Cold Hollow felt safe, a place where doors were never locked, and the worst thing that ever happened was someone losing their dog. That is, until the day they found Lily Hammond's body. It was a warm Saturday morning, the kind where the sun spilled golden rays over the town, painting everything with warmth. The streets were alive with the sound of the neighborhood waking up, dogs barking, lawnmowers buzzing, and kids out riding their bikes. Lily, a bright-eyed 9-year-old girl with curly brown hair, skipped down Elm Street with a popsicle in hand, her pink backpack bouncing against her back. She waved at Mrs. Wheeler, who was standing in the doorway of the bakery, her apron dusted with flour. "Good morning, Mrs. Wheeler," Lily called, her voice full of youthful joy. "Morning, dear. Stay safe." Mrs. Wheeler responded with a smile, wiping her hands on her apron. Lily didn't stop. She was in a hurry, eager to meet her friends at the park. As she turned into the shortcut alley behind the old auto shop, the sweet scent of the popsicle mixed with the scent of freshly cut grass. And then she disappeared. 30 minutes passed, and the town's usual hum of life continued, unaware of the nightmare that was unfolding just behind the corner. It was a jogger, an older man who had been running his usual morning route, who first saw the body. He slowed to a walk as he neared the alley, noticing something strange. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the popsicle lying in the dirt, the bright pink color contrasting sharply against the dull gray of the pavement. He took a step closer, frowning. That's when he saw her. Lily's body was twisted at an unnatural angle, like a rag doll tossed aside carelessly. Her little hands were splayed out to her sides, her fingers still clutching the remnants of the popsicle. The bright pink had long since melted, pooling around her fingers, merging with the dark blood that soaked into the cracks of the concrete. Her throat was torn open, jagged and deep, as if something had slashed through it with brutal force. Blood had sprayed out from the wound, staining her clothes, the ground, the walls. The alley was painted in a grotesque, sticky crimson, almost as if the earth itself was bleeding. The worst part, the part that made the jogger's stomach churn and his mouth go dry, was the way her eyes stared up at the sky, unseeing, empty, as if the very life had been sucked out of them, leaving only terror. Her hair was matted with blood, some strands stuck to her face like a veil. It was clear from the scratches along the walls that Lily had fought hard. Her small hands had left desperate marks on the bricks, her nails scraping uselessly against the rough surface, trying to claw her way out of the nightmare that was happening to her. But it had been too late. The struggle was evident in the bruises that marred her skin, the tiny imprints of fingers on her delicate arms, the scrapes on her knees where she had fallen and tried to crawl away. She had been running, perhaps trying to get to safety, but whatever had found her was faster. Her blood pooled around her like a sickly, dark halo, mixing with the melted popsicle, creating a scene of twisted innocence. The alley, usually quiet and empty, now stood as a place of death. The sticky red liquid was still seeping into the cracks of the pavement, oozing with a slow, deliberate finality. The jogger staggered back, his breath coming in short gasps. His heart pounded in his chest, thudding loudly in his ears. He couldn't process what he was seeing. He didn't want to, but there was no denying it. Lily Hammond was dead, and the town of Cold Hollow would never be the same. The sound of a siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the quiet. But to the jogger, it was just background noise to the overwhelming silence that now hung over Elm Street. His legs shook as he backed away, his eyes never leaving the horrific scene. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 in a panic. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice came, too calm, too steady. I found a body in the alley behind the auto shop. It's a little girl, the jogger stammered, his voice breaking. Stay where you are, the dispatcher replied, her tone now urgent. Officers are on their way. Do not touch anything. But the jogger couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene. He knew, even before the officers arrived, that Cold Hollow's peaceful bubble had burst, and in its place, a deep, insidious fear. In the distance, behind the rows of houses, a shadow seemed to watch from the woods, hidden among the trees. But no one noticed. Not yet. Not until it was too late. The town of Cold Hollow was still reeling from Lily's murder. It was as if the very air had thickened with fear, and the residents, usually warm and friendly, now eyed each other with suspicion. Whispers drifted from one porch to another, carried by the wind. Nobody felt safe anymore. But in the midst of the growing terror, Cold Hollow got a new face. A man who looked like he didn't belong here. Officer Miles Granger. Miles wasn't from around here. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an angular face that seemed carved from stone. His eyes, deep-set and dark, always looked like they were calculating something dangerous. His expression never seemed to change, no matter what the town threw at him. Cold Hollow's new sheriff's deputy had a calmness about him that seemed to unsettle people more than it comforted them. His arrival was swift, calculated. A week after Lily's body was found, he transferred from Brooksville, just in time to pick up the pieces of a town on edge. Cold Hollow had never known a stranger like Miles, and they didn't know what to make of him. Sheriff Nolan, a large man with a booming voice and a lifetime's worth of town gossip behind him, was the first to greet him at the station. "Glad to have you aboard," Nolan had said, slapping him on the back a bit too hard. "Hope you're ready for whatever this town throws at you." Miles gave him a short, tight smile. "I'm just here to help," and that was all he said. It didn't take long for Officer Granger to make his mark. On his first shift, Sheriff Nolan paired him with Grace Porter, a tough, sharp-witted officer with a heart of gold. She was also a single mom, which made her a bit of an outcast in a town that prided itself on being tight-knit. But she had instincts, and she had always trusted them. And right now, her instincts told her that Miles Granger was hiding something. It was the way he never spoke about himself. The way his eyes never seemed to meet hers for more than a moment. The way he stood with his back always straight, like he was ready for something. But what? They were on their first patrol together, driving down the empty streets, the silence between them heavy, thick, like the fog rolling off the river. Grace was trying to break the silence, but Miles wasn't biting. "Cold Hollow isn't too bad," Grace said with a smile, trying to sound lighthearted. But it didn't reach her eyes. "Quiet little place. You'll get used to it." Miles didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed ahead, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "I'm sure I will." The car's tires crunched on the gravel road as they passed rows of houses. The morning fog still lingered, making everything feel off, as if the town itself was holding its breath. And somewhere in the back of Grace's mind, she couldn't shake the thought. Was he watching her? That night, when the town had settled into its uneasy sleep, the darkness took on a different form. It wasn't the usual quiet. It was thick with tension. The air felt heavy, like something was waiting, watching. But it wasn't until hours later, when Grace and Miles had just finished their rounds, that the first scream shattered the night. The scream wasn't far. It was coming from the alley behind the old laundromat. Without a word, Miles slammed the car into gear. His hands were steady on the wheel, but there was something in his gaze, something that flickered for just a moment, that made Grace's stomach tighten with dread. They arrived at the scene minutes later. The alley was dark, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp overhead. It was like stepping into another world, a world where the shadows were deeper than they should have been. And then they saw it. A figure, no, two figures, huddled by the wall near the dumpster. One of them was crouched over the other, the street lamp casting an eerie, distorted shadow across the alley. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Her hand reached instinctively for her gun, her fingers trembling as she stepped toward the figure, but Miles was already moving. He was faster than her, his footsteps heavy and sure as he approached. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. As they neared, the shape by the dumpster rose, slowly, like it was aware of their presence. Grace froze. The figure, a man tall with dark hair that hung loose, turned toward them. His face was covered in blood, eyes wild. His hands were slick with it, dripping red in the dim light. There was something unnatural in the way he moved, like he wasn't quite human. And behind him, sprawled across the alley floor, was the body of a woman. The scene before them was a nightmare, one Grace could barely process. She could smell the iron in the air, the thick, cloying scent of blood that seemed to fill her lungs with every breath. The woman on the ground was barely recognizable, her face a mangled mess of deep, jagged cuts, her neck torn open in a way that looked less like a wound and more like a brutal statement. The blood was everywhere, spilling out of her, pooling around her body, soaking into the concrete beneath her. Grace's hand shook as she reached for her radio. "We need backup. Now." But her voice was barely a whisper, as if the words had been stolen from her. Miles didn't even flinch. He just stood there, his eyes locked on the killer, his expression unreadable. And then, without warning, the man moved, fast. Too fast. He lunged for Miles, grabbing him by the shoulders, twisting him to the side with a speed that sent them both crashing into the dumpster. Grace screamed, her gun drawn, but before she could react, Miles was already on his feet again. He moved with terrifying efficiency, every motion smooth and precise, like he was playing a deadly game of chess and the man before him was just a pawn. In an instant, Miles was on top of him, breaking the man's arm with a sickening crack. The killer's scream echoed off the walls, but it was cut off by a swift, brutal punch. Miles didn't stop. He didn't even seem to notice the blood now staining his uniform, the way the man's flesh tore under his fists. The whole scene played out in slow motion like a terrible dance, the killer fighting, but with no real chance of winning. In the end, it was over as quickly as it had begun. The man lay still on the ground, his face a crumpled mess of blood and bruises, his body twisted in ways that made Grace's stomach churn. Miles stood above him, breathing heavily. His eyes didn't even look down at the man. They were fixed on something else. Something beyond the body, beyond the violence. For a moment, Grace thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Something darker, something dangerous. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. As the sirens finally wailed in the distance, Grace took one last look at the scene. The figure lying in the alley, the blood, the woman. She shivered, unsure of what she had just witnessed. Was it just self-defense? Or something else? Something darker? And why did she feel like she was being watched? The evening was thick with the smell of rain, the air heavy and oppressive, like it was trying to suffocate the town. Jessica Green had no idea what was coming. She never did. She was alone, as usual, in her small ground-floor apartment on Birch Street. She lived a quiet life, tending bar at night, sleeping in late, and filling the silence with the hum of the old washing machine. A far cry from the chaos that had come to Cold Hollow after Lily's death. The apartment was small, with a kitchenette that smelled of stale coffee and burnt toast. Her laundry room was a dim, narrow space just off the kitchen, cluttered with mismatched cleaning supplies and half-filled detergent bottles. It was the kind of room that people didn't notice, a forgotten place that echoed with the buzz of a ceiling fan and the drip of a leaky faucet. Jessica was folding her clothes, her back to the door. She didn't notice the creak of the back entrance until it was too late. She frowned, setting the last towel down. She was sure she'd locked the door. Hadn't she? The night had felt wrong from the beginning, but she brushed it off. Still, a shiver crept down her spine as she picked up the bottle of bleach and began scrubbing at a stain on the floor. The noise again. Footsteps. Someone was in the apartment. Her hand tightened around the mop handle, the wooden shaft cold against her palm. She turned quickly, but there was nothing. The room was still. Only the low hum of the washer and the clink of her keys against the counter filled the silence. She shook her head, dismissing it as nerves. Maybe the wind had pushed the door open. Then she heard it, the scraping sound, like something or someone was moving around outside the door. Her heart stopped. She was alone. There was no one else here. The light overhead flickered. For a brief moment, everything went dark. Jessica froze, her pulse racing. She gasped, fumbling for the switch, but it didn't turn back on. A creeping dread pooled in her stomach, the kind of feeling that made you sick, made you want to run. But where? Suddenly, the door slammed open. The figure that stood in the doorway was a blur of shadow, just a silhouette, barely visible in the darkness. But it was enough. It was enough to send Jessica's heart into overdrive, pumping pure terror through her veins. She swung the mop at him with all her strength, the handle connecting with a sickening crack. But it didn't matter. His hand shot out, catching her wrist, squeezing hard enough that she felt the bones creak. Her scream was cut off as she was yanked forward, her body slamming into the cold, damp wall of the laundry room. Her breath was knocked out of her, but before she could recover, the gloved hand was on her throat, digging in with terrifying strength. The air sucked from her lungs. Her vision blurred. She gasped for breath, her hands clawing at the wrist, squeezing her neck, but the grip was relentless. Her body thrashed, trying to break free, but it was useless. The darkness in her vision was closing in. And then, just as suddenly as it began, she was released. Gasping, she staggered back, coughing and choking, the air thick with the smell of bleach and blood. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor. Tears blurred her vision, and the pain in her throat made it almost impossible to scream. But then she heard it, the sound of footsteps again. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for something, anything, to defend herself. The mop handle, the bleach bottle, the knife block on the kitchen counter. But it was too late. The figure was back. And this time he wasn't alone. In his hand was something sharp, something jagged. A shard of glass, the broken remains of a bottle from the kitchen. Jessica's eyes went wide with fear. She tried to move, to crawl toward the door, but the killer was faster, his footsteps a silent countdown to her end. He was upon her before she could escape. A scream bubbled up in her throat, but it was a choked sob, muffled by the weight of his hand slamming into her mouth. She was powerless as he forced her to the ground, her body crashing against the cold tile floor with a sickening thud. She could feel the sharp edge of the glass being pressed against her neck, feel the pressure building as it sliced through her skin. The pain was unbearable. The blood poured out in hot, gushing waves, soaking the floor beneath her. Jessica couldn't scream anymore. Her vision flickered, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, and the world was fading. But the killer wasn't done. He wasn't finished. With one last brutal twist, the glass was driven deep into her chest, cutting through flesh and bone, carving into her with the precision of someone who had done this before. The blood splattered across the floor, coating the walls, dripping down onto the tiles in slow, rhythmic pulses. Her life spilled out of her, in pools of red, staining the room in a dark, sticky mess. Hours later, when her neighbor came by, knocking on the door, looking for some sugar, the only thing left was the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. The smell of death hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The door stood open, but there was no answer, only silence, and the blood, still soaking into the floor, as if it would never leave.